So here's a quick video on our second day of getting the oil pan gasket replaced and the engine mounts, and as well as rebuilding the steering rack. So slower progress than I had hoped today, but I'll take you through everything that happened and where we're going from here. Stay tuned. Thanks for tuning in the latest edition of Grind Time with Rudy. So my goal with this project is to replace a very leaky oil pan filter, replace worn out boots on the steering rack, and contrary to what I said yesterday, I'm going to replace the engine mounts. I had hoped to be a little bit further along today, but it's just as well, because overnight I decided that for all the work I'm going through, since I'm going to take the engine mounts out anyway, it would be crazy for me not to replace them. Actually, placed an order overnight to 928S. Roger at 928S recommends and sells a Volvo engine mount. It's liquid filled like the Porsche ones, but according to him, he's been selling these as a cost-effective alternative for 10 years. And the current replacement mounts are $450 each from Porsche, whereas these are a much more economical alternative at $95 each. So I should have those in by about Thursday. My goals today, I wanted to make sure that I put a hoist in place that's going to hold the front of the engine, and I had to do a lot of research on that, so that burned up time to make sure I was doing it the right way, and I'll show some video on that. And then my main goal after that was taking out the steering rack today. Unfortunately, the tie rod gave me fits. One of the worst things that can happen is a tie rod that spins while you're trying to take the nut off. That happened on the driver's side. Kind of threw me for a loop for a bit. All right, so here I am using a hoist I bought at Harbor Freight, and I'm putting in a set of chains. That is structurally the strongest area of the fenders. It's actually underneath there is the strut towers. In addition to the chain supplied by the thing, I had some cargo straps. So what I ended up doing was using a combination of the chain supplied with the hoist and some straps, moving straps I have. So the ones you see on the right-hand side actually go around the fan support. That fan support mounts to the water pump that I replaced last year, but that is noted as a lifting point on the front of the engine. So using that, combined with, if you recall from last year, I put on a pork tensioner for the timing belt. That bracket is pretty strong, and I decided to, on the left side of this diagram, you're seeing the combination of the chains and the moving straps going around the pork tensioner frame. So I'm pretty confident that this setup will support the engine. One thing to keep in mind, this 5-liter 32-valve engine and the bell housing rated at 500 pounds. So that bar you saw on the hood is rated for 1,000. And keep in mind, this bell housing where you're about to see me right here, the transmission's not connected to it. The torque tube that goes back to the back of the car, and that's where the Mercedes 4-speed automatic transmission is for the 50-50 weight balance. What I decided to do is use a pole jack here, and I will be using this as a support of the back of the engine. So I think the combination of this pole jack with the aforementioned straps and chains, I think will hold the engine in place. Certainly it'll give me plenty of breathing room to run if it fails, but everything I've read is it's good. The first part of taking the steering rack off is loosening the tie rod ends on either side of the steering rack. Unfortunately, I ran into the dreaded situation where I couldn't get the nut off of the ball joint. It would just turn the shaft of the ball joint. So let me show you what I did to mitigate this. Basically, I used a bottle jack supporting the underneath of the ball joint in question, tie rod end, excuse me, and that putting that weight on it forced the shaft up into the tie rod end of the steering rack. That did the trick to hold the shaft solid while I was able to turn the nut off. There's a good shot, a close-up shot of the bottle jack pushing weight onto the tie rod end enough that it would hold it in place while I got the nut off. And there, finally. All right, with that one done, I moved over to the passenger side. And this one was a much easier affair. It stayed in place and the nut came off without much fanfare other than the lack of room forcing me to use a combination wrench. So you get the idea. It's coming off, slow but sure. Luckily, I didn't have to take the wheel off on this side. Save some time that way. It's mainly the reason why I didn't want to do it. Now with the nut off, I have a tie rod splitter that you're about to see. Here, so now with the nut off, I was using my handy tie rod splitter. And this contraption, basically I put a 3/4 inch socket on it, and that pops it usually within a minute, like you see that. So the passenger side tie rod end was now off. I moved back to the driver's side, put that tool on, and all this took was a couple of turns, and boom, it was off. All right, so here I am starting to take the screws off of the flex plate underneath that mounts the steering rack to the engine cross member. Now here's a good shot of it. There are a total of 8 bolts. There's a time lapse of me getting the final bolt off after taking all of those off. But this is giving you a good idea of how filthy it is with the oil pan just above that. When the steering rack mounts to this, there are bushings, and 928S has a set of Delrin bushings. Those are on their way, and I will replace those parts in there as well. And here I am getting the final bolt, and that support plate is finally coming undone. And there it's off, and you see the steering rack in all its glory. So now there are 4 power steering connections that use banjo style clips for the fluid that come in there. I only need to remove 2 because 2 of the lines actually are integrated on the pump itself. Here I am trying to remove the yoke. This is the last remaining piece. This is basically the steering wheel connection, and I'm having trouble trying to figure out how to get that off. I've got to read up tonight. That is a universal joint that comes in off of a shaft from the steering wheel down to this steering rack. And I took the one bolt off, but I I've not done the other one, and I've got to make sure I know what I'm doing on this. So you can see I have my oil change. The banjo nuts are 20 millimeter. Didn't have much of a problem there. I had to use my breaker bar to loosen them, but this is a good shot though. You see how loose the steering rack is now. And then just above it, you see where the white and oily, where I'm pushing that in, that's actually the cross member. That is the cross member that'll have to come out that has the engine mounts. Normally, if you're just doing the engine mounts, you can take the cross member out, but support the engine for using the oil pan. That's recommended by Porsche. But when the elaborate setup I showed you earlier is needed because I'll be taking the oil pan off to replace the gasket. Tomorrow, my plan is to work on getting the steering rack finally out, cleaning it up, putting in the new axle boot covers, the tie rod ends, giving them a close approximation, and as well as the Delrin bushings. I want to have that subassembly ready to go when everything's put back together. So that's it. I do appreciate you watching. If you're liking these daily vlogs on risky business, please subscribe if you haven't done so already, and by all means, press the like button. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.